We covered the different types of hardship for a hardship waiver. So we're going to move on now to another important factor that goes along with this is timing. What are the processing times? What's been happening? What's the latest with that? So right now, I'll talk about the no objection waiver. That's taking around 4 months published by the Department of State, but in reality, the Department of State times aren't very necessarily accurate. So we've seen 6 months just for the Department of State side. Then you have the amount of time it's going to take your embassy to turn around and give you that no objection statement. So that can take a few months. It could take, anywhere from like 1 to 6 months, depending upon the country you're from, even longer. On average, what we see is anywhere from about 6 months to a year, usually, for the no objection waiver. For the hardship waiver, it's taking USCIS right now about 14 months just for USCIS. With the hardship waiver, there's a series of steps involved. So first, when we prepare the application, we're preparing it for Department of State and USCIS. We submit the application to both simultaneously. Then when we submit the application to USCIS, which we include the I-612, our legal brief, the statements, all the supporting evidence, USCIS then takes 14 months to review it. Then they issue a favorable recommendation, issue a I-613, forward it onto the Department of State if it's approved. If it's not approved, they'll issue a request for evidence asking for more documentation, which could possibly slow down the processing times. Now, Department of State is taking anywhere from 36 to 52 weeks to issue an approval. So both of these combined, you add up both of these times together to get the total processing time. So we're seeing anywhere from perhaps like a year and 11 months, 2.5 years around there to get an approval, depending upon like if you're receiving government funding, if you're a Fulbright scholar, it's going to be on the longer end. With that processing time, it's really important to start your process early. So you can start your process 2 years before or 2.5 years before you're going to complete your program to mitigate the fact that these times are taking so long. Melissa, you want to add anything to that?
I mean, we can definitely talk about the possibility of expediting with USCIS and the Department of State, because I know that.
Let's move into that. Let's talk about expediting with USCIS and the Department of State. That'd be fantastic.
So I know that this is something that clients are always interested in, and something that we most of the time try to pursue for our clients, again, because these processing times are so long. So what clients need to understand is that we're talking about expediting at 2 different stages. So first, we need to talk about expediting at USCIS. What we generally find is that USCIS is rather reasonable with requests to expedite, in the sense that if your status is set to expire before standard processing times, if you have status that's going to be expiring within the next, let's say, 6 months, 10 months, something like that, and we make an argument to USCIS that the client's status is expiring and standard processing times at USCIS are 14 months, so their status is going to expire before their case can be adjudicated. In general, we have found that USCIS is rather reasonable in granting the request to expedite. Now, the issue becomes that because at this point, USCIS processing times are at 14 months, even though USCIS is processing your case faster than other cases, it's still an awfully long processing time. The other part that I don't like about USCIS is that we do not know whether they are processing your case on an expedited track or not. So I will file a case, and then 8 months later, I see that it got to the Department of State, and I say, oh, well, obviously they granted our request to expedite in that case because it's already at the Department of State level. It didn't take the 14 months. And we can talk later about some recent approvals that we've gotten and what the processing times have been for those cases and which of those we filed requests to expedite for, so that individuals can sort of have an idea of what that looks like. Now, after your case gets to the Department of State level, then we need to talk about filing a request to expedite with the Department of State. So unfortunately, I have found requests to expedite at the Department of State level to be extremely fickle. The Department of State says you can only file a request to expedite within 30 days of the expiration of your status, and it has to be for urgent humanitarian reasons. So, for example, if you see that your case just now got to the Department of State and your status is expiring in 3 months, obviously the Department of State is not going to make a decision in time, but the Department Department of State will not even consider a request to expedite unless it is filed within 30 days of the expiration of your status. The other part is the Department of State will only consider one request to expedite per applicant. So individuals can choose to have our office prepare a request to expedite, or they can choose to go to a congressman or a politician to have them file a request to expedite the client's behalf. In my opinion, and from what I have seen, clients do not seem to have success with having a politician file a request to expedite on their behalf, because the politician simply states, oh, I'm asking that you expedite this case on behalf of the constituent, but they're not building and preparing a request to expedite the way your attorney would do it. And then where this becomes extremely problematic is sometimes we will have individuals who go to their senator, their congressperson. This senator or congressperson does this request to expedite on their behalf. It gets denied. Then they come to us. We prepare an actual request to expedite that's well documented, but the Department of State says, no, we won't even consider this. We only consider one request to expedite per applicant. And again, it's the same situation if an individual tries to file a request to expedite on their own before that critical 30-day period. Then if we try to file a timely request to expedite on their behalf, again, they won't consider it. They'll deny the first one on the grounds that they're not within the time to file a request to expedite, and then they'll deny ours on the ground that they already had tried previously and it's only one per applicant. And again, these are things that are not in the law. There's no regulation stating that this is the way it has to be. This is just how these policies that the Department of State has chosen to adopt, and we have to file within these constraints. The other part is, even if you're within the 30 days of the expiration of your status, and even if you file a wonderful request to expedite, my experience is that the Department of State is rather fickle with their request to expedite. I've had a lot of requests to expedite that really should have been approved, and I'm talking requests to expedite where I will submit pages and pages from doctors, explaining the hardship in this case. And there have been cases where we will get a denial of the request to expedite within 2 minutes, just like an automatic denial, boilerplate language. It's clear that the Department of State did not even look through the paperwork. So the only good news is that whether or not your request to expedite is approved or denied has no effect on whether the case is ultimately approved or denied. So you can get a denial of your request to expedite, and it will have no effect on your later approval of your waiver. These are things that we try as much as possible to expedite our cases for our clients. At the USCIS level, we do tend to save them some time. At the Department of State level, it's really hit or miss. We try our best under the constraints that are given to us by the Department of State, but I feel as though the Department of State has certain periods of time where they stop granting requests to expedite, and it's very hard to move the case forward. So the other thing I've noticed with the request to expedite is that sometimes a good request to expedite will be denied, but then I'll notice that 2 months later, the case will end up getting approved, which is faster than it would have otherwise gotten approved. So I think sometimes they don't officially approve your request to expedite, but they still unofficially take notice of your case and move it along faster than it would have if you had not filed the request to expedite. And later on, we can talk about actual times and how much time we're actually saving with these requests to expedite. But, we'll definitely try to expedite the case as much as possible. It is hard because the processing times are so long. But, this change, I feel that right now the processing times are at their all-time longest that I have ever seen. But this can definitely change and improve. It's always hard to predict what's going to happen a year or a year and a half from now. So we'll try our best with the request to expedite, but the processing times are very long, and this could get better on its own. So we'll have to wait and see.
I think that's a good point that you brought up about the processing time. So first of all, it's all up to the government on how long these cases take. But we've seen it all across the board to less than a year to now, as Melissa mentioned, it's at its all-time worst. So we're hoping it'll improve, but nobody knows because it's government that's adjudicating these.
And then just one more topic. Like I remember back in 2016, before the waiver processing times got longer and longer, we were getting waiver approvals in 6 months. Immigration, it just depends on how many officers they decide to have these cases adjudicated. And case processing times can move forward dramatically. It was maybe just a few months ago that employment authorizations were taking up to 13 months. And then it seems they allocated more officers, and now employment authorizations are turning around in just a couple months. Just to give an example of how immigration can very suddenly catch up with the backlog and start adjudicating cases much quicker. So I really think that it cannot get any worse than this. So I really feel that the processing times are set to get better. How much better? I don't know, but I do feel that they're set to get better.
Yeah, we're definitely hoping this is the worst it'll be. And talking about the work authorizations, we're seeing that specifically that fast turnaround time for where we're filing the marriage-based green cards, and there's a pending J1 waiver, that's a whole nother topic of discussions with the risks involved in whether you should or should not do that. But we have seen in those specific cases where fortunately USCIS has been adjudicating those at a much faster pace than normal.
Hope this video serves you. I want to thank you for taking the time to watch this video. By watching this video, you're bettering yourself. By bettering yourself, you're bettering your family. And by bettering your family, you're bettering the world. Thank you. Bye for now.